The courtroom felt colder than usual that morning. An artificial chill humming from the vents above, made sharper by the tension that was already clinging to the walls. It wasn't the kind of tension that came with anticipation of a dramatic cross-examination or a sensational verdict. It was quieter, heavier, like the room itself knew something sacred was about to be challenged. Pam Bondi stood near the counsel's table, arms crossed, gaze fixed not on the jury or the opposing counsel, but on the bench. On him. Judge Raymond. Kessler. A name whispered behind closed doors. Respected publicly, feared privately. In this district, he had become a fixture, immovable, unquestionable, always looming over the proceedings like a sovereign. He didn't just interpret the law, he shaped it, bent it. Sometimes in broad daylight, sometimes in the shadowed corners where lawyers learned not to look too closely. But Pam had looked, and what she found had shifted something fundamental beneath the polished surface of this case. What began as a standard criminal proceeding, a fraud indictment with murky financial records and a high-profile defendant, had slowly, subtly morphed into something else, something darker. Witnesses silenced, evidence excluded, rulings made, in chambers with no record, and all of it pointed back to one man in the robe. Pam had noticed it first in the pre-trial hearings. Objections overruled before she finished speaking. Motions dismissed without explanation. Body language. Tone. 1,000 tiny signals that told her this wasn't just judicial preference. This was orchestration. The courtroom was already full when she entered that morning. Spectators packed the gallery, some drawn by curiosity, others by rumors that had started to ripple through legal circles like a coming storm. Journalists who had never bothered to cover this circuit were now present, pens poised. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the red light of live broadcasting flickered just beyond the heavy oak doors. Pam took her seat, flipping through the final pages of her file, her movements efficient, controlled. Across from her, the prosecution looked uneasy, confused by the shift in energy, but not yet aware of its cause. They were playing yesterday's game. Pam was already in tomorrow. Judge Kessler entered from his private chamber, black robes flowing, expression unreadable. He adjusted his spectacles, gave a mechanical greeting to the court, and settled into his seat as if he were preparing for another day of quiet command. But today, the gavel would not protect him. Pam stood slowly as the judge called for the next matter on the docket. "Ms. Bondi, are you prepared to proceed with the witness cross-examination?" She didn't step toward the stand. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, one that hadn't appeared in Discovery. One no one had seen before. She placed it on the table with a deliberate thud. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady, "before we continue, I must request a motion outside the presence of the jury." Kessler raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" Pam met his gaze, with something harder than steel. "Judicial misconduct." A collective ripple moved through the courtroom like the first shiver before an earthquake. Even the clerk looked up, startled. The prosecution froze. Kessler's face remained neutral. But there was a flicker, small, fast, but unmistakable. "That's a serious accusation, Ms. Bondi." "I'm aware," she said. "And I have serious evidence." The judge hesitated. A beat, too. Then he cleared his throat. "Jury is dismissed until further notice." The bailiff moved quickly, guiding the jurors out as murmurs grew in the gallery. The door shut behind them. Pam stepped forward. "I've come into possession of a series of emails, text messages, and financial records that suggest a pattern of undue influence and bias in this courtroom, specifically decisions made in favor of parties represented by firms with direct financial ties to you, Judge Kessler." The air vanished. She reached into the folder and pulled out a set of printed screenshots, holding them up for the court reporter to enter into the record. "This includes a communication between Your Honor and a senior partner at Denmar & Cole, LLP, dated 2 days before your ruling to exclude key evidence from the defense. In that message, Your Honor assured the firm, quote, 'Don't worry, it won't reach the jury.'" The judge's hand twitched. Not much, but enough. Pam didn't blink. In addition, I have proof of wire transfers from entities linked to the Denmark Trust, deposited into a shell company registered under your wife's maiden name. That same shell company, Your Honor, just purchased a condo in Clearwater Beach under an LLC. A condo paid for in full, 4 days after the ruling was issued. The prosecution finally spoke, voice weak. Your Honor, this isn't part of the case. Pam cut in without turning. It is now. The court reporter paused, visibly stunned, hands hovering over the keys. Pam turned back to the bench, eyes locked with the judge. You have compromised this courtroom, Your Honor. You have silenced evidence, swayed outcomes, and deceived the very institution you swore to uphold. And today, I'm not just defending my client, I'm defending the law itself from you. Gasps echoed. The gallery surged forward, as if pulled by the gravity of what they were hearing. Judge Kessler opened his mouth to speak, but Pam Bondi had already stepped forward again. And she wasn't finished, not even close. Pam's heels echoed across the tile as she moved deliberately toward the bench, not out of disrespect, but out of intent. Every step she took carried the weight of months of observation, of suppressed objections, of watching the scales of justice slowly tilt under the weight of quiet corruption. Judge Kessler's fingers curled around the armrests of his chair as, though bracing for an earthquake only he could feel was coming, he cleared his throat again, slower this time, his usual polished control starting to splinter. Ms. Bondi, he said, voice deliberately low, you are treading dangerously close. To contempt. Pam didn't flinch. Then let me walk directly into it. The courtroom held its breath. Pam dropped another file onto the evidence table with a sharp, satisfying smack. This is a transcript of a conversation between Mr. Gerald Blake, senior partner at Denmark & Cole, and an anonymous source who has since come forward under federal protection. In that transcript, Your Honor's name is mentioned 5 times in relation to favorable outcomes, courtroom predictability, and, most damningly, reciprocal discretion for prior favors rendered. She turned and gestured to the bailiff. I'd like to request that the court clerk initiate immediate contact with the State Judicial Oversight Board. This is not an isolated issue. This is structural misconduct that spans multiple cases. Kessler leaned forward now, his voice suddenly louder. This is a circus! No, Pam said coldly. This is a cleansing. The tension inside the courtroom shifted, no longer fear, but focus. The gallery leaned in, not out of morbid curiosity, but from something more primal. Hope. Pam took a breath, slow and controlled. Then she lifted one more sheet from the folder. It wasn't a transcript or a financial record. It was a photograph, a still from a private security camera. This, she said, placing it on the projection screen, is an image of Your Honor entering a private dining club, the Mariners Table, on the night of July 18th. The man you're shaking hands with is Warren Trelston, lobbyist and legal liaison for Denmark & Cole. That dinner was not listed on any disclosure form, despite the fact that the meeting took place 3 days before your decision to dismiss the subpoena request for the firm's client in this exact case. The image appeared on the screen like a final nail being driven into rotted wood. The judge's face, side by side with Trelston's, both men grinning, hands clasped, their posture too familiar to be explained away as coincidence. Kessler's jaw clenched. He looked down for the first time since she began, eyes scanning something. Only he could see, his crumbling defense, his collapsing leverage, the moment he stopped being untouchable. Pam didn't let up. It is the duty of the court to recuse itself when there is even a perception of bias. But this isn't perception. This is evidence. This is motive. This is a deliberate manipulation of judicial authority in favor of personal gain, executed under the guise of impartial rulings. The room buzzed. The court reporter kept typing, her hands visibly shaking, her eyes wide with disbelief. And then Pam did something that made every head in the room rise. She stepped closer to the bench, closer than protocol allowed. Your Honor, I hereby file a formal motion for your immediate recusal, along with a petition for judicial investigation, accompanied by preliminary evidence already submitted to the District Ethics Commission as of 7:45 this morning. Kessler looked up sharply. Pam nodded, confirming it. Yes, I've already submitted it. The commission is watching this in real time. Everything being said right now is being streamed directly to them. A faint gasp rose from the back rows. The cameras weren't allowed inside, but Pam had found another way to bring light into this courtroom. The judge went silent. Pam waited, eyes unwavering. And then, slowly, almost mechanically, Judge Kessler looked at the clerk. I will recess proceedings until further notice. Counsel is instructed to remain available for emergency session. The gavel struck once. He rose, walked toward the door. His steps weren't slow, but they weren't steady either. Not the steps of a man leaving court. The steps of a man retreating from truth. Pam turned, gathered her files, and stepped away from the bench. Her client whispered from behind her, "Is this really happening?" Pam didn't turn. "No," she said quietly. "It's ending!" And that was only the beginning. Because what she'd started wasn't just the unraveling of one corrupt judge, it was a fuse lit beneath a system that thought it would never be questioned. And Pam Bondi had brought the match. The courtroom emptied, slowly, as if the weight of what had just unfolded was too much to carry out all at once. Every person in that room seemed to walk with a different awareness now, like they had witnessed something historic, but not the kind that would be posted and forgotten by next week. This was the kind that would echo, shake loose buried truths, and alter careers. In the hallway outside, reporters swarmed, but Pam Bondi didn't speak. Not yet. She moved past the microphones and flashes with the focus of a surgeon walking away from the operating table. Not triumphant, not boastful, just certain. Behind her, the prosecution team stayed huddled near the door, whispering in frantic tones, their heads ducked, their eyes darting. They weren't regrouping, they were recalculating. And up on the 12th floor of the State Judicial Commission, 2 ethics investigators were already sitting in a private viewing room, their screen still displaying the paused courtroom feed. One of them leaned back slowly in his chair. "She just cracked a sitting judge," he muttered. The other replied, "No, she just opened the gate. Now we see what else comes through." Back in the courthouse, Pam didn't return to her office. She turned into a secured conference room, 2 floors up, where a man in a dark suit with a federal badge sat waiting. He stood as she entered, nodded once, and slid a folder across the table. "The rest of it," he said. "Offshore accounts, the false trust structures, and a pattern of favorable rulings going back 9 years. Kessler's not alone. 2 other judges, 3 clerks, at least 1 senior prosecutor." Pam opened the folder, scanning the pages with a cold efficiency. "We bring this forward now and they'll scatter," she said. "That's why we want you on record," the agent replied, as the one who made the first move. "You own this now, Bondi. You go forward with it, and you'll be at the center of a political war." Pam didn't hesitate. "Good." He studied her for a second, then leaned forward. "You realize what happens next, right? You're going to be targeted, discredited, threatened. Kessler's not just a judge, he's a gatekeeper. He controls influence, careers. If he goes down, others will fall too. They won't go quietly." Pam's eyes didn't leave the documents. "Then they can go loud. I don't care." She slid the folder into her briefcase and stood. "But they will go." Meanwhile, Judge Kessler didn't leave the building right away. He retreated to his chambers, locking the door behind him, pacing in tight, uneven circles. His phone vibrated nonstop, calls from law firms, financial advisors, numbers he hadn't saved but immediately recognized. His hands shook as he scrolled through an encrypted chat, reading messages that said things like, "We need a meeting. Tonight. If this leaks, we're all exposed. She has more. I know she does." Kessler sank into his chair. For the first time in decades, the title, Your Honor, felt more like a joke than a shield. Back downstairs, the courthouse buzzed. Clerks exchanged hushed theories. Security guards whispered to each other behind badge clips. Law students who had once treated courtroom duty like a chore now crowded each other in stairwells, replaying pieces of the morning like war stories. Pam, meanwhile, returned to her team with the air of someone holding a second loaded weapon. "We're not done," she said. "Kessler was just the gate. We push forward now, file motions in every case he's touched over the last 2 years. We get statements from every defense attorney he's overruled, every pro se litigant he shut down. We file them as a single brief, class action petition for judicial review." Her co-counsel stared. "That's going to make you a target from every direction." Pam nodded. "Good. Let them aim. Let them burn everything down trying to stop this." Hours passed. News broke. The court's official site removed Judge Kessler's name from the active directory, pending investigation. An emergency judicial session was announced for the following week. Anonymous sources began leaking whispers of bribes, backroom favors, even threats issued to junior attorneys. But Pam didn't stop. She gave no interviews. She filed more documents. She met with whistleblowers. She spoke with reporters only off record, making sure truth stayed ahead of spin. She refused to be the story. The system was the story, and the system was unraveling, because once one pillar falls, the others sway. And once the courtroom saw that someone could stand up to a corrupt judge and not just survive but prevail, it lit a fire that wouldn't die easy. And Pam Bondi wasn't watching it from a distance. She was walking directly into the flames. By the next morning, the courthouse no longer felt like a place of order. It felt like a battlefield that hadn't yet been cleared. The hushed reverence of justice had been replaced by something else: suspense, anticipation, and a rising sense of reckoning. Pam Bondi walked through the main entrance alone. No bodyguards, no media statement. Just a single leather briefcase in her right hand and a calmness in her stride that looked nothing like arrogance but everything like control. Security watched her pass, silent. The clerk at the front desk looked up, locked eyes with her for just a moment, and nodded. Respect wasn't demanded. It was simply understood. Upstairs, the Judicial Oversight Commission had called a closed session. By mid-afternoon, word leaked that 2 subpoenas had already been issued to associates of Judge Kessler. An ethics board spokesperson gave a rare comment. "The allegations being reviewed extend beyond a single courtroom." That sentence alone sent half the local legal community into a panic. Phones rang across downtown law offices. Emails were frantically deleted. Conference rooms that once held quiet billing meetings now buzzed with lawyers crafting exit strategies. Inside her temporary war room, an unused conference chamber now stacked with evidence boxes, Pam was already 5 steps ahead. Her team was tracing financial networks, matching case files to real estate transfers, identifying clerks whose fingerprints appeared across a suspiciously consistent trail of motions and dismissals. This was no longer a defense effort. This was an investigation. One of her junior staffers stepped in, holding a USB drive like it was a detonator. "It's the audit trail," he said. "We found 6 sealed decisions from Kessler over the last year. 2 involved cases where the defense had no chance to respond before summary judgment. One was ruled in favor of a business partner's holding company." Pam didn't say anything. She just took the drive and plugged it into her laptop. The documents opened line by line, paragraph by paragraph, each one a bullet disguised as bureaucratic language. "Get me the client lists from Denmar and Cole," she said. "Then match those to every case assigned to Kessler in the past 5 years. I want a red line report on every overlap, every ruling, every blocked motion." The room shifted as her team moved in quiet urgency. No one second-guessed her. Not anymore. She was the force cutting through the rot, and they were the hands clearing the debris. Meanwhile, across town, Kessler was no longer hiding. He was fighting. He'd retained a crisis PR firm, hired a white-shoe criminal defense attorney, and issued a statement through a spokesperson that attempted to frame the allegations as politically motivated, deeply misleading, and potentially defamatory. But Pam had anticipated that too. Before the evening news aired, she filed an amended motion, a chronological summary of internal memos, financial disbursements, personal emails, and even video footage showing Judge Kessler attending private fundraisers hosted by parties with active litigation under his gavel. She released none of it to the press. Instead, she sent it to the Commission, to the Bar Association, to the Federal Prosecutor's Office, quietly, properly, irrefutably, and, still, she said nothing publicly. Let others talk, let them spin. Pam Bondi was building a case so loud it didn't need a microphone. Later that evening, she stood alone in the viewing gallery of Courtroom 6, the lights dimmed, the rows empty. The echo of the space reminded her of something. How fragile trust really is. How easily it breaks when power corrupts. How quickly it spreads when unpunished. She stared down at the bench, the same seat where Kessler had once dismissed her objections with nothing more than a smirk. Now that seat sat cold, unoccupied, waiting for accountability to arrive. Her phone buzzed. A message from the Commission. Meeting. Scheduled for tomorrow morning. Be prepared for testimony. She stared at the screen, nodded once, and turned off the phone. This wasn't a battle she had hoped for, but it was one she had trained for her entire career, watching people wield power like it was armor, watching systems buckle beneath quiet corruption, watching justice bend until someone stood tall enough to stop it. And now, she was the one, standing. When she left the courthouse that night, the streets were still alive. Sirens in the distance, flickering lights in office towers, late-night murmurs from lawyers still at their desks. But for the first time in years, something had shifted. The law no longer felt like a closed system. It felt vulnerable, open, and all because Pam Bondi had walked into a courtroom, looked a judge in the eye, and dared to say, "I see you." Now the whole world did too, and what came next wouldn't just shake one bench, it would shake the whole foundation. The next morning arrived like a gavel in the sky, loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. The city hadn't slept. The legal community hadn't rested. And for the first time in years, the courthouse wasn't just a building, it was a crucible. By 8 a.m., a convoy of black sedans and unmarked cars had lined the courthouse's side entrance. Inside, the Judicial Oversight Commission had taken over the top floor, converting its sterile hearing room into a battlefield cloaked in formality. A long mahogany table ran the length of the chamber, with 7 commissioners seated behind it, former judges, ethics professors, and prosecutors. At their center sat Chairwoman Evelyn March, a woman with decades of courtroom experience etched into every line of her face. Pam Bondi walked in wearing black, not out of vanity, but as a message. Today, something ends. She carried no suitcase, no team, just a single binder in her left hand and a pen tucked into her sleeve. She took her seat without looking around. She didn't need to see who was watching, she knew. Across the room, Judge Kessler sat flanked by his attorneys, his face carefully blank. But the exhaustion showed. His suit didn't fit quite right. His cufflinks were missing. His left foot tapped beneath the table, once per second, as if trying to count down the seconds until this nightmare was over. Chairwoman March began. This hearing has been convened for preliminary review of ethical violations and judicial misconduct as filed against the Honorable Raymond Kessler. Testimony will be taken under oath and on record. The oath was administered. Pam stood. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was focused. The first question came fast. Ms. Bondi, you claim to possess evidence that suggests a sustained pattern of favoritism and financial conflict of interest. Is that correct? Pam nodded. Yes, Chairwoman. And have you submitted that evidence in full to this body? I have, the Chairwoman gestured. An aide brought over a box stamped Confidential Bondi Submission. The commissioners flipped through documents while Pam remained silent. There were no opening statements here, no performance, just truth. Commissioner Renly spoke next. Can you explain how you came to suspect Judge Kessler of misconduct? Pam straightened. It began with inconsistencies in his courtroom rulings. Evidence was excluded without cause. Hearings were scheduled without proper notice. Objections were overruled before arguments were made. When I cross-referenced those decisions with external financial filings, I found connections, discrete ones, between the firms receiving favorable rulings and shell corporations tied to accounts under Judge Kessler's spouse's name. Do you believe these were isolated incidents? No, she said. I believe this was a system, one with intent. Gasps didn't echo in this room, but the silence grew louder. One commissioner whispered something to another. Chairwoman March lifted a file marked Denmar Holdings. This document appears to show a $375,000 transfer to a trust administered by your wife's financial manager, Judge Kessler. Do you deny this? Kessler leaned toward the mic. His voice cracked, the confidence finally bleeding out. I have never sold my rulings. Pam spoke before anyone else could. Maybe not with words, but with silence, and with signatures. The blow landed. Hard. Commissioner Renly turned. And what do you hope this body does with your testimony, Ms. Bondi? Pam didn't blink. I hope you send a message. She stepped forward slightly, binder in hand. I hope you remind every judge who ever thought the robe was a shield that the law doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the people. And if they corrupt it, if they twist it for profit, for favor, or ego, then they'll be seen. Just like Kessler was seen. She paused, then said it again, more slowly. I see you. Kessler's head dropped. The commissioners conferred quietly. Then Chairwoman March spoke. This commission finds sufficient cause to recommend immediate suspension of Judge Kessler pending formal charges. A full review of his rulings from the past 10 years will be initiated. A federal referral is already in progress. Pam exhaled. Once. Quietly. It was done. But only this part. The real fallout was still ahead. As she left the building, flashbulbs erupted in the street. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones thrust forward. Her name trended on social media within minutes. Bondi breaks the bench. But she didn't stop for sound bites. She walked to the edge of the crowd, got into a waiting car, and disappeared. Elsewhere, the dominoes began to fall. Law firms issued statements denying involvement. Judges across the state reviewed their disclosures. A whistleblower hotline went live at the State Bar Association, and within 2 hours, it was flooded with calls. The system that once protected itself had been breached, and everyone who ever hid behind its silence now feared the echo of 2 words that refused to go away. I see you. Pam Bondi didn't burn the system down. She forced it to look in the mirror, and tomorrow she'd be holding the glass up again. The next day dawned with a weight in the air, something unspoken, like the city itself had paused to watch what would happen next. The news had traveled far beyond state lines. National outlets replayed footage of Pam Bondi's testimony on loop, with analysts dissecting every sentence, every pause, every damning piece of evidence she had delivered with surgical calm. Legal earthquake, one headline read. Pam Bondi dismantles a judge and a system, read another. But inside Pam's office, far from the cameras and chaos, there was no celebration. There were no champagne corks or self-congratulation. Just the low hum of computers, the rustle of papers, and a growing warboard pinned with case files, timelines, financial charts, and names. So many names. Because she knew this wasn't over. Kessler was just the first, the exposed, the symbol. But corruption never wears a single face. It spreads, it adapts, it survives behind the silence of others. Her phone buzzed. A message from the whistleblower hotline. 5 new submissions. 3 from inside the judiciary. 2 from court staff. 1 naming another judge. She turned to her assistant. Get me everything they sent. All of it. Yes, ma'am. She sat down at her desk and pulled up the newly flagged files from the Oversight Commission. Kessler's rulings were already being parsed. Legal scholars, former defense attorneys, journalists, all of them were calling for retrials, reviews, reversals. A second headline scrolled across her screen. Defense motions surge in wake of Bondi revelations. 1 email stood out. A message from a young attorney in a small town 2 counties away. Ms. Bondi. I've been afraid to speak for years. I watched a judge bury evidence once to protect a prosecutor he played golf with. I never had proof, but now I do. If you're building something, I want to help. Pam leaned back slowly, staring at the words, feeling them settle. She typed a reply. Short, immediate, send everything. We'll protect you. We don't stop now. Outside her office window, the sun was beginning to set, casting a long gold trail across the courthouse roof across the street. That courthouse had once looked unbreakable, inevitable. Now, it looked like a place on notice. Back inside, her co-counsel stepped in. They just confirmed. Kessler is officially under federal investigation. The FBI wants access to our files. Pam nodded. They can have it, all of it, but we stay in control of the timeline. I don't want them sweeping this under political spin. If this becomes about optics, they'll bury it. He looked at her. You think they'll try to spin it? She met his gaze. They always do, until someone makes it impossible. He didn't argue. He just left the room to start organizing, and Pam remained seated. The same spot where it had all started, months ago, when something felt off, when no one else wanted to raise their voice. When everyone around her had learned to play by the rules, even when the rules were rotten, but she hadn't, and she never would. Later that night, she sat in front of her desk, the office dark except for the lamp casting a soft amber light over the stack of names on her list. There were more now, dozens, each connected by threads of abuse, secrecy, power. And she was going to trace every single one, not because she wanted revenge, but because justice, real justice, only existed when the powerful were afraid of consequences. Again, she scribbled 3 words across the top of the next file. The next one. Then she opened it, eyes calm, hands steady, heart relentless. Because Pam Bondi hadn't just exposed a corrupt judge. She had torn open a wound in the justice system and forced the whole world to watch it bleed. And now, she wasn't going to. Let it scab over in silence. She was going to clean it out, one name at a time.